Welcome to Sunlit Brushstrokes. In today's video, I'll share my top 4 tips for successful watercolor layering. These tips may be simple, but once you put them into practice, they can make a world of difference in your work. We'll start with a quick sketch of these tulips, so if you love to draw, you can follow along. If you prefer to trace, you can find an outline for these tulips in my Etsy shop. But if you're just here for the watercolor layering tips, I've included timestamps so you can jump right to the painting. After I've shared those tips, we're going to walk along step by step through the first half of this painting. And if you'd like to follow along for part 2, you'll want to stay tuned because that will be coming out in about a week. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do myself a quick sketch for these tulips. I don't want to sketch right on the watercolor paper. I just have a cheap piece of computer paper I'm using to do my sketch, and then I will transfer everything. So I'm going to do a long, narrow composition today. So I've got a long, kind of tall piece of watercolor paper. I'm just going to mark out approximately where I want my drawing to go. And then I'm going to use this reference photo and I'm going to crop it down and just work on these 2 tulips here. So what I want to do is start out by just kind of placing the tops of the tulips, and then I'm going to actually take artistic license to kind of draw in some leaves and stems. So we'll see how this goes. So I want to put my tulip heads about like this. I think that will work okay. And then I will bring them together with some stems. It's gonna look like a couple balloons right now. And then let's figure out where we want to put the leaves. And if I need to, I can shift everything, but at least I more or less have the idea where how narrow I want to keep things, if that makes sense. Then I'm gonna come in here and draw myself a leaf. Yeah, I'm gonna probably extend the paper just a little bit more this way and then crop it off this side, but at least I know about how my boundaries will be. I'm gonna come something like that. I want to have a long skinny leaf here, but I'm thinking to have it kind of curve over so we can see the inside almost of the leaf like that, something like that. And I'm kind of going bumpy and wavy for the edges of the leaves because sometimes tulip leaves have that kind of waviness, don't they? I'm trying to figure out, I want to place a tulip leaf that's kind of bent over this way. Do I like that? I don't know. We'll see. I'll just kind of keep sketching here and see if I'm happy with the leaves. I always find the composition hard. And so when I'm doing it, not just copying the reference photo, so maybe have one. I'm not sure if I want a tall one or not. Is that okay to put a tall one back there? I don't know. It's not too bad. We'll see. Hopefully I'm happy with that. So for this flower here, well, why don't we start with this one? Let's do this one. This is almost easier. And it has a petal that's kind of like, if we look at the photo, see it kind of comes like, it kind of is a little wider at the bottom. It gets a little bit narrow, about so, and then it kind of comes in again when you come up to the top. So I'm just going to do something like that. And then this area here has almost a little bit more roundness. So I'm going to extend this out just a little tiny bit, and then I'm going to do the petal beside it. And these petals are pretty straightforward if I just kind of more or less copy the photo. Actually, I could probably have left a little more space between them. Again, I'm just going to pull things back a little ways here. I'm not being perfectly photorealistic, but more or less looking at the photo to give me a bit of guidance. And then in here, yes, I've got a slightly smaller opening than what you see in the photo, but I don't know how persnickety to really be. I'm gonna not worry about it. It's a touch bit skinnier, but that's okay. Then I'm coming in here and filling in this little spot here, and it's clearly, there's another petal there. And then we have a petal kind of here, and another one, you can barely see it back in there. I think I'm okay with that. We'll see. We can see as we go to paint it. Definitely want the stems to be a little bit wider. Then over here, I'm going to do this one. This one's slightly more complicated, but not too bad. I'm going to do this petal that's kind of like this big one that goes right like this. It's a little bit pointy at the top. So I'll do that pointy petal. Not quite so pointy. Yeah, I'm kind of slopping it, but that's okay. Let's just try and get the basic shape for this petal in here. And over here, I can see this kind of extends a little bit past this one. You can see that petal right here, right? It kind of comes like this. And I probably will take a little artistic license and end up bringing it down a smidge because this one's really pointy and I don't think it has to be that pointy to look well. So I'm going to probably just tweak that in a minute here. So this one, I can see there's a petal in between and then there's a petal. Let's do this outside petal and just try and leave ourselves a nice little space. I'll pay attention this time to approximately how much space is in here between these petals. It's another petal, yes. It's that darker, beautiful petal, but I'm just gonna do the outside petal first and then I'll come back in and do the inside. And something like so. I just kind of keep looking at the reference photo and then back at my drawing and then the reference photo back at my drawing. So now you can clearly see this line here that's, I don't know that it would be considered a vein, but kind of like a vein. And then it kind of comes up almost to a point right there, doesn't it? And then back here, there's this interesting shape right here that you can see. So we'll draw that shape in. And then this is the one that's really pointy and it kind of points out like, you could almost say it comes up about this high in the reference photo, right? But I don't think we need to do it that high. I think it's almost distracting to have it that high. So I'm just, like I say, I'm gonna take artistic license and bring it in and make it just a little less bold. If you like it, like a nice tall point there, you can definitely do that. There's no reason you have to bring it down. Okay. I think I like that, and yeah, I'll just kind of slide when I go to transfer my tulip over. So I'll grab my thing, I'll show you. Actually, I'll just trim this down so it's easier for you guys to see what I'm talking about. And then what I'll do is I'll trim some off this side, and then I'll just center it after that, if that makes sense. You wouldn't have to do all this paper trimming. You could just kind of eyeball or like feel through the transfer paper to see where things are lined up. I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so I've got my watercolor paper, and some people have asked me if I use hot or cold press. I do use cold press, but I use the smoother side, if that makes sense. You know, one side seems a little bit bumpier than the other. I generally like the smooth side. So I'm gonna lay that down, and then I've got my piece of graphite paper, and I'm gonna make a sandwich here. Graphite paper, dirty side down. I have a video on how to do that, so I will just kind of move a little bit faster through this stage. You can just go watch the video on how to transfer things if you haven't transferred with graphite paper before, or use whatever transfer technique you prefer, because you can use a window or whatever works for you, or a light box. So I'm just going to lay this like this. I think I'm going to be happier with the placement. So I can feel, or you can even see probably through that, right, that my watercolor paper is about there and there. So I have slightly slid things over, so I have a little more breathing space on this side. Okay, so I'm just going to grab my pencil and do the transfer quickly, and then I'll be back. All right, so let's lift that up and we can see, yes, our transfer worked really well. And I'm going to grab myself my kneadable eraser and just lift ever so slightly, because things are a little darker than I'd like them to be, which is better than them being too light. But I'm going to lighten things off just a little bit so that I don't have these deep dark lines showing through my watercolor paint. Now, my first tip for successful watercolor layering actually has to do with supplies. I enjoy using Arches 140-pound cold press watercolor paper. Not only is it a joy to work on, but it actually will allow you to achieve the layers you're after. When you use a paper that's cheaper or too smooth, it doesn't allow your layers of paint to fully almost like soak into the paper, and then when you try and add another layer on top, it will lift. And so a good quality paper like this is essential. And then with your watercolor, you want to work with colors that are transparent, which is going to allow a more luminous effect. The colors will layer on top of each other, yet you'll still be able to see some glow from the colors beneath. The colors I personally enjoy using are Hansa Yellow Deep. For blues, I enjoy both ultramarine blue and phthalo blue. And for my red, I use quinacridone Rose, and a new addition to my palette is quinacridone Magenta. And I'm going to be using a little bit of this today. And then for my brushes, I'm going to be using my Artegria round brushes as well as these Simply Simons. I do often use the Artegria round at the beginning of my project. They are not essential. They're a softer brush that hold more water, which can work nicely in the first layers or washes. However, if you could only choose one type of brush, I would actually go with the Simply Simons brushes, because they're a little bit firmer and they're going to allow you to get better details on the final layers. My favorite sizes in both of these brands are 6, 8, and 10. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do this first tulip with my yellow, and I'm going to just put in just a nice soft yellow into these shapes. Whoops, I've already got some on that brush. I was using this brush to get a little water into my yellow, and what would you know? There's already yellow on it. All right, I'm wanting to just really get water on first, so I'm just going to wet the shapes of this tulip here, and then I'll drop in the yellow and just try and guide it around. So I used my softer brush to add the water. You could use any brush for adding the water. Sometimes I just use the softer ones because they release more water and they do that faster. Then I have my firmer brush, and I use the firmer brush to add the yellow. So I'm just going to take a little bit of my yellow, try and take from the clean part out of my palette here. And I'm going to put some of it kind of along the edge of this and here. And yes, I'm using wet on wet right now, and the paint is kind of bleeding around everywhere, and that's okay. I am looking at the referenced photo to see where the yellows are the most intense, but I'm clearly getting some areas like, okay, right here, if you look at the reference photo, you can see it's kind of lighter, well, more of like a white color here, so I don't want as much yellow, but I want some back here. Does that make sense? Kind of like that, and yet it is all bleeding around, and that's okay for the first layer, because I'm going to be coming in and adding a little bit more of our other colors next. So I'm going to just drop that in there. I think kind of yellow right like so. And I think I'm going to maybe just put a tiny little bit on this back one, and then I'm going to call it good for that, and I'm going to let that dry. So I'll come over here and do the exact same thing to this flower. So I will take my yellow, and this one has more yellow. It's a little bit more on the orangey side. I think this is going to be a really pretty color when it's done. So once again, just filling it in with water, and then I'll fill it in with my yellows, and then I'll have to let it dry. So just come in here. And this one, like I say, a lot of yellow, so I'll probably be dropping more in than I did before. Yellow all the way up to the top. There's some areas that are a little bit more white, and you can pay attention to that if you want to, or just not worry too much about the lighter areas on this one, because for the most part, I would say there's a lot of yellow. So you can just kind of put the yellow in the areas that are yellow and let it bleed down, because we will be getting some orange colors, and the orange will blend beautifully with the yellow. You can even come a little further with the yellow downwards on this one, because as I said, this one is more of an orangey yellow flower, so you can be a little more liberal with your use of yellow here. Put some more back here, get that nice and bright. Look around for wherever I see the more intense yellows and just kind of drop that in. Look for intense yellows, drop it in, do a little bit more here. Again, anywhere there's going to be more orange, it's fine to have a yellow undertone. The areas you don't maybe want quite as much yellow, or any areas, for instance, this flower here, if you look at the reference photo, you can almost see like a purple undertone there, and that's where I don't want as much yellow, because I really want to be able to get a beautiful kind of purple looking glow there. So that's where I'm keeping that more white. Whereas this one, it really doesn't matter as much if I come down a little bit further with the yellow. There are a few areas that if you look at it close, you're like, it's a little touch purple, but I don't want to be too persnickety here. Try and be a little bit loose and playful still, even though we are being a little bit more photorealistic than, you know, if we weren't using a photo. So let's just let that dry. And why don't we do the leaves? Because we can. So I'll just pull back for a minute here. And I have some greens in my palette. This was made mainly with my phthalo blue and my yellow, my Hansa Yellow Deep. That is the yellow I was using there too, by the way. That's Hansa Yellow Deep. I already started mixing up some green, and I've got a nice bright springy green. I'll just sample it on this little scrap of paper here for you to see. And we can add more water, and it will get more, you know, light as well. So there's our green, and I do have a mixture in another palette here that I had going that's kind of a darker green. You could make it by doing almost the same thing I did with this one, but in this case, you're going to want to have a little bit more red in it and a little bit more blue. The red is going to dull it down a bit, so you don't want much. You could even just use probably mainly ultramarine blue with maybe a tiny, tiny touch of red. I'll sample this on the paper too, and you'll see it's just a little bit darker. So you can see that kind of olivey green tone that's created by having a little bit of a reddish color. And you'll need probably a touch of red, not just the ultramarine probably won't be quite enough to get you that olivey, but you can experiment. If you use phthalo blue and the yellow together, you just need to add it like a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit of red to get it to tone down like that. So the one thing I don't want to do in this case right now is to touch the leaves to my flower petals, because the green will bleed in, and in this case I don't want the bleed. Sometimes that's beautiful, but I'm not going to do that today. So I'll just try and avoid touching it, and I'll do some of these petals that are not touching the flowers. And then once we get this on here, you could even, if you wanted to, just carry on with the flowers. You wouldn't have to do these right now. I just thought, you know what, we could do these right now, and we'll get a head start on the leaves, and then when we use the hair dryer, which is what I'm going to probably do to dry this here, the leaves can start drying at the same time. I'll just do these front ones because both these back ones are touching. So let's just do these for now. We'll do some light green. So I'm going to use my same soft brush. You could use whatever brush. I'm just going to drop it in a few places. And I'm not going to worry about the fact I've got folds here. I'm just going to carry on and just get the green on here. And then I'll come back in and deal with the fold later once this layer is dry. Just get the green in there. And I'm doing nice long linear strokes. Again, I can get more detail after. So let's just get the green on here, maybe a little bit over here. And I like this brush because it comes to a nice tip. And then when you come in with very light pressure, you're able to get that beautiful, just nice thin tip at the tip of your leaf, which is beautiful. Maybe like that. Again, take these nice long linear strokes, and then I'll drop in some of that darker green. And like I say, I'll come back in later. These leaves in the front, I probably do want them to be lighter in the end than what I'm going to have the back ones. But as I said, I can add more detail later. So we're just getting in some basic greens just because I want everything to dry. I want the yellows to dry before I do anything else. And I think I'm going to have to go ahead and grab the hairdryer, dry the yellow and these leaves, and then I will be back. You see what I just did there? I kind of re-carved the outside of this leaf, and I left a little white bit there, and I really like that. That was kind of one thing that just, it was almost a happy accident as I was doing it. It was like, ooh, I like that. I'm going to leave that be. So just keep that in mind. You can always carve, if your outside lines with your graphite and pencil aren't too dark, you can kind of reshape things with your paintbrush. So I will go ahead and dry everything, and then I'll be back. So I've gone ahead and dried that, which is a really important tip for working with layers, is you want your paper dry to thoroughly dry before you add the next layer. You can test using the back of your hand or your wrist. If it's at all cool to the touch, it means it's actually still damp. You don't want that any bit of coolness there when you go to add your next layer. And the reason I do like to add the yellow first is I find that it layers best by being on the bottom. When I start layering more of the yellow colors towards the top, I generally am not as happy. It tends to get muddier for me. And so I always, for me, an important thing is to get those yellows on there first. And the paper almost, I say locks it in, but I just think that cotton paper is that little bit more absorbent. And so the paint just really like saturates deeper into the fibers of the paper, and it's more held there. So that's one reason I like to work with a paper that will absorb it, but then yes, make sure everything is dry and you get those layers on there first, the yellow colors on there first. So now we're gonna go ahead into the colors that are kind of like almost next to yellow on the color wheel. And that's the way I tend to work. I tend to work from my yellows down. So here's my color wheel. So I work with the yellow first and then kind of come this direction. If I'm working with colors such as in our tulip flowers, we're kind of working with these colors. So I'm going to be working in that order of color. And if I'm working with greens, then I'll come more this way. And sometimes I will start even like we did with this green here rather than straight to yellow. If you want to do a yellow kind of underpainting, you could, but as you can see here, I started with our lighter green and we'll work into darker greens. But again, I always like to start with these lighter colors at the top of the color wheel and then work my way down. And not only are these lighter, these are warmer. And then I work my way into the cooler, but these are also darker. So I do happen to have a mixture here from another project that was made with quinacridone rose and Hansa yellow deep. So these two colors here, and I made this kind of almost like peachy coral color, and I really like it. So I'll probably just add some water to it like so, and let's test it on our paper. I kind of think it's going to be good to go. And then what I'll do is I'll probably add a little bit of the just more and more of the quinacridone rose as I want to get deeper into my reddish colors or the reddish pinkish colors. And then on the other one, this one does have some beautiful purples, and so I'm going to be very, very careful that I more or less leave this side alone in this layer, and we'll do purples in the next layer. So I'm just going to be working with like the orangey red colors in this layer. Oh yeah, I never tested that for you, sorry. Let's take a little bit of this on paper and you can see, oh, beautiful color, isn't it? It's a very beautiful kind of orangey color, but you can see when you water it down, it does get kind of more coral. And then when we add a little bit of the quinacridone rose, so we can go over here and just grab some straight out of our palette you'll see it will work really nicely to deepen this and get us more of a reddish orange color, right? So we can work in this layer where we're going to work with some areas that are more watery, some areas that are just almost like straight with this coral color that again made with those, and then we'll drop in a little bit of our quinacridone rose as well. This color here, I don't 100% know. I have a suspicion this is just the same thing with just more quinacridone rose in it. No, it seems a little bit muddy. Got something else in there. We're not going to use that right now. So I'm going to go ahead and wet this flower again, but I'm not going to wet the whole thing. I'm going to do it petal by petal now. So let's just do this petal here first. And I'll drop in my orangey color. And you know what, I can probably wet both petals. If I have enough water on here and I work fast enough, I'll be okay. I might need to come add more water after I feel like yeah, we'll see. We'll have to possibly add more water before we go too far with this one. Let's start with this one though. And I'm going to put a little bit of that coral color. Again, this one has a lot more purple in this flower, so I don't want a ton of the coral, but I'll do the coral kind of right next to the orange, or sorry, next to the yellow. So kind of in this section here. And some of the areas, I will admit, almost look like they're going to get a little bit muddy in the shadows, so I'm okay with a little bit of that orange kind of leaking down this way, if you will. So just put that orange on there. And I am using a firmer brush. It gives me a little more water control. And you know what? I might even have another one on the go for some water. So this is another Simply Simon's brush. Again, more water control, holds less water. I'm just going to soften that edge because you probably could see I was getting a hard edge right along there. So leave that be. Let's move along faster. I want this to be sort of loose. I don't want it to be something that we labor over too intensely. So let's go over here, just put a little more water in. I want to make sure that I'm wet enough. And then I will drop some of that orangey color that's on my brush. I'll just put it in here a little bit towards the top. And let's just come down. Again, I'm looking at the reference photo to kind of decide how far to come. Remember, we talked about not going too far because of the purple color I want to get in here, and I think I've already kind of gone too far. So I'm going to lift a little bit there. I think I'm happy with this. Yeah, I'm not going to add any more orange to this one. So let's just wash my brush quickly, and I'm going to lift a little bit of that orange color out. So dry my brush. So I washed it, dried it, and then it will work to kind of soak things out. And again, I like the Simply Simon's brushes. For that, they tend to do a better job just because they hold less water. They can also work well to pull that water out. I feel like they work better for pulling water out. Okay, just lift a little bit there. Okay, don't want too much orange in this one, so let's just leave that be. Maybe yeah, just leave it be. Let's go over here. This one is going to be a lot more fun for the oranges because there's a lot more orange in it. So let's go ahead and you know what? Let's just work with Simply Simon's brushes. I'm going to use the skinnier one for the paint and the slightly larger one. So by skinnier, number 6, the paint, number 8 for water. I'll try my best to stick with this. Sometimes I kind of, as I go, I mix up the brushes. We'll try and use number 8 for water and number 6 for paint. And I'm just continuing the whole time. I'm just still using this coral color. I haven't dipped into my quinacridone yet, but I think I'm getting close because I'm seeing a lot of reds on the edge of this one. So I'm going to first put the orange on here along the edge and let it kind of do its thing. And then maybe I'll let it it seems very wet right now. So I'm going to let it sit for just a minute, come over here, and then I can maybe put some more of the red on with a bit more control. So water first. And then I'm going to come in with my orange, and I just more or less, I think I'm almost going to fill this. I know, you can see, I'm going to ignore maybe some of the white at the very base. We'll see that you can see barely any white at the base of this tulip flower here. And it does get very red in here, so maybe I can kind of work around it. Again, if I put too much orange, it may look muddy when I add some of my reds, but it should be fine as long as I'm working with quinacridone rose. Once I start pulling in some deeper, more purple reds, then we'll have problems, but I'm okay with how it's looking right now. I'll just use my water brush, soften the edge again. I feel like I'm being really persnickety, like going too slow. Am I going too slow? Okay, this time I took a little quinacridone rose and dipping into my orange, so I've got a little bit of both on my brush now. I'll come in here with that. And it's just a nice level of dry, the paper is, and so it's bleeding around, but it's not going crazy. So I really like how it's behaving right now. And that's just, sometimes if things are going too crazy, you just have to give your paper a minute to just sit, let the water absorb and evaporate a smidgen, and then you can throw more of the paint on top. So I'll just go ahead, maybe put a little bit more even. Wow, that's getting intense. I like that though. Do you guys like that color so intense? Yes, I think it's working. Okay. So now this is like more dry. I'm going to try and put quinacridone rose, maybe a little bit of the orange color with it, just along the very edge. Hopefully it's not too dry or we're going to get some goofy things happening, but I think it might be okay. Ooh, very pretty. Isn't that gorgeous how those colors mix? And that's because we're all these colors mix well on the color wheel. They're all close to each other. We haven't crossed into adding any real blue colors yet. When we start adding purples, that's where we have to be more cautious about getting mud. So everything is touching. Like, I wanted to be able to work on any of these other petals. Everything's touching, so they'll bleed into each other if we don't dry it. So I think I'm gonna have to dry it before I do anything else. Yep, I'm gonna have to dry it. I could have done this one, you know, with, well, it's a funny level now, it's damp. I could have done the reds in there, but that's okay. I'm gonna dry it and then I will be back. All right, so everything is dry and I wasn't paying attention as that continued bleeding around that I completely lost my yellows. So I'm using my little scrub brush here. This is just a shader brush and it's a little firmer and it generally lets me kind of, I'm just scrubbing it with water and it's allowing me to take some of that orangey colored paint off and I'll be able to get maybe a little bit more yellow back in. Oh well, those things happen. It's going to be pretty even if I don't get it quite as yellow as the photo is, but I wasn't paying attention. So let's just use that damp area. I'm going to just let's just quickly wet that whole shape with this same brush. And then I will just drop a little more of my yellow over there just to kind of get a little bit more yellow, a little closer to the photo. Yeah, it's not going to be as yellow, but that's okay. I will just go ahead and maybe just put a tiny little bit more orange just at the far side here. Since I've re-wet this shape, I was kind of thinking I would, you know, just do my next layer in the purples, but that's okay. I'm going to put more quinacridone on this far side. This is quinacridone rose. Just put a little bit more over here because we can. I could have done this on the last layer and I'll just stop there and I'll keep an eye on it because I don't want that running up into my yellowy, not so yellow area, but you know what area I'm talking about now, right? Where I wish I had more yellow. Just lift a little bit of it. I can have a little bit more over an orangey right here. So I'm just kind of going back and forth between the orange and the quinacridone rose, but trying to stay somewhat out of my yellower areas. Okay, I'm not going to worry, as I said, I'm not going to pay too much attention to the white areas down here. Just think it's not as necessary. All right, so since this is wet right now, we don't want to do any shapes beside it as usual. So we will just carry on and do the same one we've been working on before. I'll put a little bit more of our quinacridone rose on it. And I could branch into a little bit more of a purpley color, but you know what? Well, should we? Let's see. Let's start with the quinacridone rose, and then we'll see how much of our quinacridone magenta we want to use, because that's what I'm planning to get to work towards, but that's kind of our last color because it's the most purple color. So let's start with this pinky color. And once again, I'm just going to come to the bottom of this. I'm not going to worry about the white. Just start putting more of our quinacridone rose and get this more or less filled in this area. I'm going to leave a little area that's a little more white because it's more red at the base here, isn't it? It's more of a reddish color. And then I'm going to just guide things around with my water brush just a little bit. I think we could probably take the plunge and add a little bit of our quinacridone magenta. So that's here. And I'm just going to put some right here where it's beautiful. And you can definitely see that more purple look that it brings. And we would not want to add that color into our yellows. It gets a little bit muddy, just a little bit, not bad, but we can put it on top and it works okay. Gonna need a little bit more. You can see more light in this area where it's kind of like a softer color, but I want to make sure that I've got enough on here. So just gently adding little bits at a time till I'm happy with it. Yeah, I think that's good. And then I'll kind of, like I say, use more of the rose, quinacridone rose, as our in-between. so we can get a little bit deeper and darker in this area here if we want to. I'm gonna have to lift. I know you can probably see I'm losing some of the yellows that I need over here, so I'll lift a little bit of that. Let's just wash my brush. I was using my water brush for paint. I told you I get them mixed up sometimes. Let's just soak that out, make a nice dry, clean, thirsty brush, and lift a little bit of this paint that we have going at the edge here so we can see our yellows before they totally disappear. You can even take your paper towel and just kind of do that to dab, never rub. But yeah, I think I'm happier with that. That's really pretty. Okay, let's move on from that. I'm just gonna have to kind of keep an eye on it because it could end up bleeding in like what it did over there. So I don't want it to do that on us. I might go a little darker right here. I still feel like it could get darker in this section. So let's just do that while it's wet. But you can see now I'm gonna really have to watch it because the water is, because I used the paper towel there, it got a lot drier and it's bleeding funny there. So I'm gonna have to come and guide it around here before it completely dries. I'm just keeping my eye on it. I know it's not behaving exactly how I want it to. I'll add a little more of this quinacridone magenta over here. Might even mix some of it into this deeper, darker area down here. Yeah, I think I'm happier with that. I want it to be light up here. But I'm getting a little bit persnickety for being something that I want to have a little bit looser and less realistic. I'm getting a little bit on the realistic side, aren't I? So let's just kind of dab again and then do again the exact same thing I did here. Kind of dry, thirsty brush, soak it out, dab it a little bit, and then I'll just kind of watch it here, see if it's gonna behave. It is definitely bleeding into that yellow, isn't it? So just dabbing it, kind of lifting some of the oranges out of the yellow so that we maintain that yellow. Okay. I can still see it. It's still bleeding in there, isn't it? Every time I leave it alone, it's like, oh, we're coming in here. I'll put more water on here and kind of pull it back. Just put clear water in this area here. Or you could say my water is not totally clear, but it's clear enough that the paint will, let's do this. You're seeing all the things I'm having to do to try and guide this paint around. But more clear water and let it run this way. So I'm tipping my paper more the direction so the paint runs the opposite way of where it was running. Okay, I think I'm happier with that. Let's let that be. And I could probably hold it tilted for a minute as it's just sort of drying, just to kind of continue to remind it what way it's supposed to go. But you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and dry this so that I don't have to tip my paper. And yes, I'm gonna use the hairdryer and dry it while I'm holding it in this position. All right, so I've gone ahead and dried that, and you can see it ended up working out okay. So I hope that was entertaining and maybe a touch educational to see how I handle things when the paint isn't quite behaving the way I want it to. But let's go ahead and take all the remaining shapes that we haven't done anything with coral yet and get them all up to speed. So with this one, I'm gonna wet the top edge a little bit, but I'm gonna work a little bit drier on this shape. It's smaller, and so I'm probably gonna do a little bit more of like wet on dry to do these details. So I'm going to come in here. So this bottom part I have not wet yet, and I'm just coming on here while it's dry and dropping that right in there. And then yes, as I come up, I'm going to hit the water and you'll see it's kind of, all of a sudden I'm getting that soft edge as I come up. So I'll just fill this area in with my peach first, and then I'll add some of my darker colors in a minute. Again, as I come up here, I hit the water and it fades out. Down here I'm getting more detail, and I'm kind of trying to maybe carve that petal that's kind of in front a little bit with how I lay down my coral color here. And like I say, we're skipping that white. We're just keeping it simple. We're focusing on all of our corals and our reds for today, but there's no reason you couldn't have been a little bit more cautious and slow and left the whites there. But I'm going to go and use a little bit of my quinacridone rose now and fill it in so I get just a little bit more darkness here. It's going to help push this petal behind the ones in front of it. You can see that already happening, right? Just by kind of coming along the edges like that. And then I'm going to come kind of where the center, again, I'm calling it a vein, not really a vein, and get that shape in there. And then let's just drop a little bit of water up here because you can see everything is bleeding around more than I expected it to. That red is just coming up high. I might even just throw a little more of our yellow in there. Take care of that. Just a little bit. I'm working fairly dry right now. I'm not too wet. Coming back in with my quinacridone rose. Just kind of going back and forth between those paints, and as I said, I'm working drier using these brushes that allow me to have a little more water control. There's definitely still water there, but not as much. And I could even put a little bit, let's see how dark I can go with the rose there. Maybe like that. Okay, I think I want to leave it alone before it gets messy. And I'm just going to come over here and do the same thing over here because this is wet. I do want to still come and deal with those petals afterwards, but let's try doing the same thing with this one. We're going to maybe put a little bit, ooh, I don't want to wet the whole thing. This one's really interesting, really interesting. So let's just do wet on dry, and then we can soften the edges because we got some really interesting shapes here. So look really close. I'll zoom in so you can see what I'm doing. Coming along here with the coral color. And as I said before, we're going to bring our white down here. Now we're going to soften this edge, especially kind of at the top here. You can almost see there's like a strip of yellow, and that's where I'm going to try and not fill it in with the coral. So I'm taking it really slow. This is almost getting a little bit too detailed for being a loose, more loose style, which is what I was intending for it to be, but we're getting a little tight. I'm just going to fill in all the way to the bottom with the coral color. Like I say, we're going to ignore the white for this time. And then I'll drop some of my quinacridone. Oh, sorry, it's out of the picture. Sorry about that, or sorry, out of the camera. All this time when I've been saying quinacridone, it's quinacridone rose. Sorry about that. And it was out of the frame and I didn't notice. Let me slide over. The only time I used magenta was right there. All right, let's get nice and deep and dark with our red color here. So quinacridone rose, I'll just call it rose. Ooh, I like how dark that is. That's really bringing that little section to life. And I'll use a little bit of a damp brush here to just soften the edges. And then I'm gonna have to leave this one alone because it's kind of, this section here will have to wait, I think. Easier to wait than try and deal with it right now. And I'll do this one back here. So right here, I'm adding some water. And the only place I really want to do much is just a tiny little bit of coral, and maybe even, remember I talked about having a little bit of a muddy color there? There is a few places that could work, but we'll start with the coral. Just stick it in this section here. You can see that in the reference photo, right? You can see how it's kind of a coral color. Just in this area here. A little bit there. Let it leak down the side, and this is where I can grab a little bit of this rose and just drop it in there, and we get a nice kind of deep dark line there where there's separation between the petals, and this is nice and dark. I will later come and add a little bit of a coral color to this outside petal, but we'll do that after. I kind of think, oh, I'm noticing things are getting a little hard edge here. Don't want that, so I'm just going to soften that up. Put a little bit of water, and then I think I'm going to have to use the hairdryer again. But you can see how that petal is suddenly pushed back by adding that coral color, right? So I'll go ahead, dry things, and then we'll do these final back petals, and then finalize things with a little more of our rose color. If you're enjoying today's video, I'd love to invite you to join my free newsletter. In it, you'll find creative inspiration, art tips, studio updates, as well as be the first to know about workshops and lessons. If that sounds like something you'd enjoy, you can sign up at the link in the description below. Now let's get back to painting. All right, so I've dried that, and you can definitely see how getting those other shapes is really bringing this to life. So why don't we finish all the little shapes? and or at least get the base layers on all of them, and then come back into our main shape. So this one here, this is a really interesting color because it just gets a very deep yellow, like almost a muddy yellow. So for that, what I'm going to do is I've got this muddy orange color here. I'm going to take my yellow, dip a little bit into just the very edge here, where I've got like a yellow color that's kind of a orangey muddy yellow. Okay, I'm gonna squeeze it at the ferrule. I want my brush to be pretty dry, like you saw me do. I wet this shape, and I'm just gonna put it at the very base right here. See how I've got like a deeper yellow? Then we haven't really worked with this yellow color before because it's like I say, it's a little bit of an orangey, but it's got that little bit of dullness as well, so it's less intense and less vibrant. I'm gonna put a little bit on this one too. I haven't wet that shape, but I'm just gonna soften things instead of worrying about wetting it. So let's use this brush here, make it nice and dry, and just soak out the excess. And just soften that a little bit like that. And that might be enough for those back shapes. I don't want to do a lot to them, but they need a little something. You know what? I've joined them together a little bit too much, so I'm gonna tweak that a little bit. Just soak it out a little bit right there. Again, dry, thirsty brush. And just soften the edge up a bit. Being very, very dry with my techniques back there, but I'm not too worried. I feel like I just want to have a little bit of detail, and I'm not liking how much pencil I have back there, but that's okay. Let's go ahead and work over here. Now this, we had to leave a nice hard edge there, didn't we? Because of the way that that line in the middle of that petal is. We had to really almost do it as if it was two petals, or we would have lost that nice crisp edge there. So let's go to the other half of the petal now and wet it. And I'm actually leaving a little strip right in the middle that I'm trying to leave dry. We'll see how well I did, if I left it dry enough or not. And I will use my coral color first, and let's see. Yes, I left a little. Do you see what I did? Got a nice hard edge there because I tried to leave a little dry strip. It was hard to tell until I do this, and then you can tell, oh, okay, she didn't wet that. So if you accidentally did wet it and you're realizing it at this point, just wash the paint out, dry it, and then come back in when it's already dry. And you'll be able to maintain if you want to have that yellow, kind of yellow stripe in the middle. And I'm just going to come up to the edge of this petal. And then I'll just soften the top edge because you can see it's going a little bit funny right there. So clean water, just drop it in there, soften things a little bit. I can even come across the line here with the water, that's okay. Just along the top edge there. Then I will use a little bit of my rose and just put a little bit because we want to deepen this. Again, we want it to look the same as over here. So we need the rose in the mixture as well. Or I should say more of the rose. The coral has rose in it. And I'm going to go dark all the way to the bottom just because, you know, we're not leaving it light. Yeah, I think this is working. Being very tight and not as loose as I would have liked to have been, but that's okay. It's working with this particular flower and it's pretty. So that needs to dry now. Wonder if we can do any fine details on this, just coming on here, wet on dry. I'm gonna try that. I'm gonna just add a few details. So I've got quinacridone rose on my brush here, and I'm just gonna throw this like so. We can sort of see that line right there in here, and I'm gonna soften it in a minute, but I'm just putting it on here first. Make sure I'm happy with that shape. And then I will use my water, clean, thirsty brush, or kind of damp brush rather this time, to just soften that edge. I don't mind having a hard edge on one side, but I want to soften it right here. Okay, I think I'm getting way into the weeds. We're definitely getting into the weeds. If you wanted to see more realism, that's what you're getting today. Realism and layering. All right, well, let's go ahead. Oh, I need to soften the bottom there. You probably already noticed and thought that looked weird. All right, well, I think I like that. Is this dry enough This is dry enough that I honestly think we can do this back petal, I think. Pretty sure it's dry enough. And I will soften that because I know it doesn't have to be such a bright yellow, but I'm going to leave it the way it is from now. And I'll just put a little bit of water back here. I can barely tell where the edge of this petal is. Can you guys see on yours? I have to use a pencil very lightly and say, okay, I think it's about there, right? Lighten that up a little bit with my kneadable eraser. And yes, put the water on. I'm being fairly dry-ish, dampish. I'm not soaking wet. And then we'll come in with the coral color and just put it kind of at the base, especially right in here. You see right in there, it's pretty dark. So put the coral there. You can maybe even use a little bit of this yellowy color that we had, or a little bit of a muddy color, and put a little bit of that maybe right here. I just have so much coral on my brush right now. I'll just lift this out a little bit. Wash my brush and lift it. And then come over here. Yeah, something like that. You can kind of see that area is really yellow right at the edge. It's kind of folded, I think. But here it almost doesn't matter if it blends together because you can't really see the separation in the photo, and I don't think it really matters too much like that. I think I'll just go over the line a little bit. Got my coral color. I think I'm separating these a little bit by just adding more yellow to this back one. Okay, I like that. This is dry enough that I can just come on here with a little tiny bit of water, and then I will follow up with my coral. I'm calling it coral. It's like, it really looks like orange in the palette, doesn't it? Just drop a little bit of that on there. And as I come closer to the bottom, I will put a little bit of my rose as well, because it does get really dark down here. And just let it kind of move around a little bit. Use my water. I went and I'm not really being consistent with my water and my paint on these brushes right now. I'm just using my tiny brush and I'm just washing it off and coming back in here. So you can do that sometimes. All right, I think I'm mostly happy with that. I'll deal with this in a minute. I want it to dry a little bit more. Then I'll do details on the front petals. I'm going to accentuate a little bit more of the shadow in here. Just put some of that color on there. That's kind of more of the rusty orange almost. Soften the edge. And I am being overly detailed. Yeah, let's let that be. While it dries, why don't we just go ahead and get a nice second layer on the green, or maybe do these back green leaves, and then we can come in and finalize what we need to on these petals. It'll give us a little bit of a visual break. You know when you work on something too long, maybe this happens to you, you almost get like where you can't see the forest for the trees. I think that's how you say it, where you just get so absorbed in the details, you just lose the bigger picture. So I'm just gonna, actually I'm noticing that rose here is disappearing on me when I'm pulling back from it. So just quickly touch that up. So I just washed and dried my brush to kind of soften things. Okay. Now, since we're already well over 40 minutes into this painting, I've divided this video into 2 parts. You'll definitely not want to miss part 2, where I paint these leaves, and I also end up making a rather hilarious mistake that I don't catch right away. I provide guidance so that you don't make the same mistake, but I also show you how I go about repairing it. Be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you don't miss when that video comes out. In the meantime, I hope this tutorial has brought a little taste of God's beauty and peace into your everyday life, and that it's inspired you to continue enjoying your own creative journey. See you again soon. Bye!